Hi, I'm Bob Hall with APTA Private Practice, and today, lucky to be joined by David O'Hara, who is in charge of Brace Health. David has been doing some really interesting things with AI in terms of rate negotiation and appeals and reviews. But we wanted to focus in this conversation more about rate negotiation and just sort of bring to the fore what some folks are using AI to be able to do. So David, thank you for joining today, and let's go ahead and dive on in if that's okay.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Bob.
Excellent. Okay. So, first question. Many PT practices assume payer rates are essentially non-negotiable. From your perspective, after working with practices across the country, how negotiable are PT reimbursement rates in reality, and what factors most influence whether a payer will move those?
Yep. So this was my expectation before I kind of started on this work as well. So I hear constantly from practice owners really two things. One is I don't know what to say to payers. Two, I don't know who to say it to within the payer. And three, I could probably figure those things out. But from what I understand, it typically goes nowhere. So it's not worth spending my time to kind of get that all set up. We have run a number of kind of payer negotiations. We're running sort of an AI pilot right now. And to our surprise, we've had about 25 to 30% of the payers that we send letters to or call will negotiate with us. So we expected it to be basically zero. And
Mhm.
of about 25 payers that we've engaged with, seven of them have given us increases. And
Great.
then what's been a little bit interesting about that is it's often more of the regional and local payers, which can represent kind of a big chunk of practices volumes, but that we have had national payers give us increases as well, so it doesn't take them off the table. And then second is there are oftentimes the higher payers are some of the ones that are willing to negotiate. So I often hear from practices, I'm already getting a pretty good rate from them. They're not going to be a priority for us. I think you should negotiate with all of your payers because some of the best ones will negotiate. It's not just the lower ones.
Perfect. Okay, that's really helpful, and your work makes it easier for folks to do.
Yep.
Um, so for leverage, right? A lot of folks who are independent PT practices often negotiate alone, right? But those insurance companies negotiate at national scale, at least the big ones. Where do you see the real leverage points for practices when they approach rate negotiations with large payers?
Yep. Yeah, so we're pretty opinionated on this. So this is just one point of view on how this works. But the background of research that we did is we basically had AI go out and scan the whole internet, watch YouTube videos, read white papers, read blogs about what do payers actually care about. And then we brought that to some executives at a few payers and said, is this actually right? Is this what's true? Because I've just read so many different things about it's this, you should suggest this, you should suggest that. And I think it always comes down to incentives and leverage. So the first is what does the payer actually care about? What are they incentivized to do? And then leverage is what can you credibly do or threaten to do that impacts what they care about? And our perspective on this is it's really only two things. The first is network adequacy. And so many times for commercial payers, the real customers, employers judge their plans based on whether their employees can get care when they need it. And network inadequacy, meaning they don't have access to the care that they need, is what results in the payer's customers, the employer, being very, very frustrated. We saw this in mental health over the last several years. Mental health had a surge in demand. Employees were saying, I need more in-network providers. The mental health specialists were able to basically negotiate higher rates because they were hearing complaints from the employer side of things. So that is the first piece. And I can talk about some data to use to make that network adequacy argument, but you need to effectively make the case that without you, the payer is going to have some sort of gap in their network. And the
Right.
second is near-term cost control. So the average employee stays on their health plan about 18 months. A lot of times I see practices make the case about long-term cost reduction. They unfortunately are not incentivized to care about that. They need to see some sort of cost impact in the next 9 to 12 months in order to fit that framework. So the data that we always suggest practices to use will ladder up to one of those two arguments every time. You're either making a network adequacy argument or you're making a near-term cost argument.
Really helpful. So let's talk about some of that data. Practices often enter negotiations with little more than their current contract, but the types of data that folks care about that actually makes the payers reconsider rates, is it utilization, outcomes, referral patterns, access
Yeah.
metrics?
Yep. So this is where I see most practices, I think, focus on the wrong thing. I often see practice owners focus on what they care about. I can't sustain my practice at this rate, and we deserve more for the work that we do, and that's going to fall flat. You have to ask, how can I advance the payer's goals?
Hmm.
And that's where I go back to that network accuracy and the near-term cost impact. So on the network adequacy. Your job is to basically prove that they do not have enough PT. And now, unfortunately, most payers believe that for the generalized physical therapy, that they have enough. So what you basically have to make the case is that there's some niche or some specialization that you fill, and this can be broad. So there can be a geographic scarcity. You could say we're the only one within this, location. There could be population specialization, so pregnancy, pelvic, pediatrics, neuro. Those are arguments you can make to say, hey, we're the only one with this in this area. I've even heard of operational access being one. Hey, we've got a lot of night shift workers in our area, and we're open from 4 to 8 a.m., and that's when they need care. And so without us being open, you're going to lose that. And then of course there's scale. Like we have a number of practices and you need us. Now most practices, small practices don't have that scale argument, but the other ones that they can make. And then on the near-term cost increase, this one is mostly about saying that if we go out of network, we're going to retain your members, but it's at a higher cost to you. And
Hmm.
that's where I would recommend things like NPS data, anything that suggests, better outcomes. Because what the argument you're making there is not that you deliver this awesome care, which unfortunately just is not going to land, but it's rather we deliver such great care and we are so valued by our patients that they're willing to still come see us and use their out-of-network benefits, which often costs more to the payer. And so
Right.
that's where we often suggest practices to kind of use their data to make one of those two arguments.
Excellent. Okay. Well, and you're probably a really good expert to talk to in this, but the role of technology in
Yeah.
negotiation, right? You guys focus on helping practices manage administrative barriers. How can technology tools help PT practices strengthen their negotiating position with payers?
Yeah. So I would encourage every practice owner to get a premium account for ChatGPT or Claude, which is Anthropic's version of ChatGPT, and I would use it in two ways. One is use the AI to come up with your arguments. I think you should take what I'm sharing and say this is the arguments I need to make, and then have it, tell it, hey, this is my location. Find practices within 20 miles of me, and tell me what their specialties are and where I might be different from them. Here's some information about my practice. Write me a two-page letter I can send to the payer. So use it to do the research and come up with your argument and articulate it. And then the second area I would encourage you to use technology is to find the right contact. It is equally
Mm,
important to say the right thing as it is to send to the right person. And I can talk about a little bit more about that in a minute, but say, hey, I need to find the network manager for this payer in this region, and it should be able to go across the internet and find you for it. So I really will encourage folks to use these new AI tools to write these letters, come up with your arguments, and then find the right people to send these to.
got it. So really helpful. So for timing the negotiation, right? Many practices only think about negotiation when a contract renewal appears. Is there a best moment in the payer relationship when practices should initiate rate discussions instead?
Yeah, my concern with that is it will get put as a third priority on your list, and then practice owners won't do it. So I always say the best time to do it is today. Um,
Hmm.
and there is value, I believe, I don't have data on this, that if you do it repeatedly, you'll get more on their radar. And when the contract, of course, when you're about to sign a new contract, that is a good time. You have a little bit of extra leverage. But I believe every year it is a good thing to do. And if you have a letter and you have the right contact, just sending it and going through that motion matters.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So when to walk away, right? I think a lot of folks are
Yeah.
afraid of this. Every practice, I think, actually fears terminating a payer contract because of patient access concerns. In your experience, what signals indicate that a payer relationship may
Yeah.
simply not be economically viable?
Yeah. I wouldn't possibly be the expert on this one. I believe it's sort of a practice owner decision to balance their finances, their mission, kind of their goals at the time. I think a couple things to think about is I think the obvious one is to look at your cost per visit. Just what are your total costs divided by the total amount of visits? And are you losing money every time a patient comes in with that payer? If your cost per visit is
Mm,
$72 and you're getting paid a capitated rate at $65 a visit, That doesn't always mean you should leave. There are other reasons why. Maybe there's a mission element. Maybe it's a Medicaid plan that you want to work with for the impact you want to have in the world. Maybe you don't have the volumes you want for a new practice or a new location, and so you just want to get that word of mouth going. But I think looking at that cost per visit, I think what we have seen across the board is it's very scary to go out of network with your first payer. Um, and then I have seen most of the time the volumes pick back up quite quickly, and filled in with better payers. And so we routinely encourage our practices to cut payers,
Hmm.
and do it sort of aggressively. And you can always go back in network. It's rarely, that's not always the case, but it's rare that they really don't let you in. That does sometimes happen. But if they're I think oftentimes PT is massively in demand. A lot of practices have wait lists. I think there's a little bit of fear of like, well, I'm not going to be able to fill those slots. And our experience is it's more common than you think to be able to fill all those slots.
That's really helpful. So the small practice advantage, right? Large therapy chains often have contracting departments, while small practices really rarely negotiate. Are there ways independent practices can actually compete effectively in payer negotiations despite their small size?
Yeah. I think large practices are definitely have an advantage. There's no question about it. They can make that network adequacy argument and they can make that out of network cost argument stronger. I do think it doesn't mean it's impossible for independent practices, but it is a little bit of a steeper hill. I think there are two strengths that independent practices can have, over large chains. The first is, what really matters is building the relationship with the right contact at the payer. And um, once you find who that person is, don't think of them as an adversary. Think of them as a decision maker with incentives. And this is going to
Mm-hmm.
sound a little bit over the top, but ask yourself, what are they accountable for? What affects their bonus or performance review? What creates risk for them? Build that relationship and try and help solve their problem. I mean, they have, a family that they have a job that they're trying to get done. How can you help the same way you're trying to help the overall payer with their objectives? How can you help that individual? And I think small practices can often build these closer relationships. Maybe they're in the same community as that person. Maybe there's just something that resonates with that person. So I would say there's a relationship opportunity. Um, and then the second is, I think that small practices can often be a little bit more aggressive in their asks and in their statements. So we always suggest every practice you should send an email, you should follow up with a phone call. But there are things you can do. We've seen practices use a tactic where they'll say, please share the paperwork to go out of network.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they're not necessarily totally considering it, they're just trying to understand the process, but that can sometimes elevate to the right person at the payer. Hey, this is serious. They're actually really thinking about going out of network. Some tactics like that can be a little bit more aggressive. I think smaller practices can really kind of test, a little bit more than the large practices that might be a little bit more constrained on that front.
That's interesting and persuasive for the small practices, hopefully.
Yeah.
So, administrative burden as a negotiation point. Prior authorization and utilization management requirements create real costs for PT practices. We keep trying to get this across. Can administrative burden itself be used as leverage in rate negotiations? And if so, how should practices really approach that, quantifying
Yeah.
it?
So the way we approach our negotiations is we come with a significant ask. So we start with a 50% increase, in the rates, and we also ask for, increases every year that going forward. So 10% this year, 20% next year, 30% the year after, something like that. We include on that list things like reduced or eliminated prior auths. We try to do faster payment timelines. We try to do expanded visit limits if that's an issue. My only has this is a personal hesitation. Again, I don't have data on this, but I would be a little bit worried that payers will use that as like, okay, we'll give them that as a way to keep them happy, but
Uh,
we're not going to give them what really matters, which is payment. So I
mhm,
think that if you feel like you're getting totally stonewalled on payment, I think it's definitely reasonable to check in on these. I think you should include it in the overall ask, but I wouldn't
mhm.
let it be a distraction for what I believe is the most important, which is, the payment rate. So the answer is yes, you should go for it, but I would put it as second priority beyond just what's the actual rate that they're paying.
Right, or have it in your back pocket or something, right?
Yes,
Once
right.
they know. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Got it.
Yep.
So the next 5 years, right? Things are changing, obviously, with some of the technology that you use and our folks can use. Looking ahead, how do you see the relationship between payers and physical therapy practices evolving, particularly around rates, prior authorization, and administrative friction?
Yeah. I definitely don't have a crystal ball here. I feel like if I make any firm prediction, I'll watch this back in a couple years and say, "Whoops, I had no idea what I was talking about." I have a couple like theories, things that are already sort of happening. I think one is I think we're going to see many more practices use both cash pay, but also out of network. I think it's highly underutilized. I think there's more
Mm,
patients than a lot of owners think that do have out of network benefits and are more willing to use them than they might think. We see practices very successfully saying when a patient comes in, instead of saying, "Oh no, we're not in network with them," they say, "Great, we will bill you have out of network benefits. We are an out of network provider. That's great. We're going to use your out of network benefits and we will bill on your behalf." And
mm,
you're often not bound to the same rates. You can typically charge what you want and still offset some patient cost. And so I think out of network courtesy billing, which can feel to the patient like an in-network experience, I think is going to become a much bigger piece of the pie. And we've seen some really nice rate increases when you move out of network versus in network. So
that's
that's
great. Good idea.
that's one. I think hopefully there's going to be some legislation that lightens the administrative friction. That's maybe just a hope as opposed to a guarantee. And then I do think these AI tools will help a lot. I obviously am I build these AI tools, so I'm convinced that they make an impact. But I do think for most practice owners, it is worth just taking a look at what's out there. I think from 2012 to 2022 pretty much it was the same technology being repackaged and sold in different ways. There was a big moment in 2022 which is the release of ChatGPT and sort of the mass mainstream adoption of these AI tools. They are different. It is a new technology. It does allow for a different set of capabilities. So I do think it is worth taking demos, going on websites, trying seeing if you do pilot programs and seeing it, if they can actually deliver what they claim to deliver. So I'm hoping that we're going to see a lot less friction because these tools are going to be able to do a lot more than kind of the old software 1.0 could do.
Great. Really, really helpful. So conclude, any other insights you'd like to pass along to practices?
I think I think my main piece of advice is um, it is worth trying, even if you just do it for one or two pairs, and even if you just put it in AI, say, write this letter for me, find a contact for me. Maybe it comes back with one contact. Just send that letter and see where it goes. That's how we started. We took two practices and we said, why don't we just send three letters for each of those practices, and two out of the six letters resulted in increases. And we were like, wow, there might be something here. We've now, like I said, done it for 25 payers. Seven of the payers have given us increases. So I think my main point of learning is like it is possible, and these AI tools can make it a lot easier to actually write the letter and send it off. And so I really encourage practice owners to give it a shot.
That's really great encouragement, thank you for everything you're doing for the profession. And I always approach this from the patient perspective too. Fundamentally, it helps patients if PTs get paid more, right? It really does help
100%.
communities, and folks can really provide more services. So
I will
what you're doing
often
is helping a
I'll
whole bunch of
often tell my practices that we work with that the least empathetic thing you can do is to go out of business.
mm-hmm. Makes a lot
And
of
your
sense.
margins have gone from 20% to 8% in the last 6 years. That's the reality. Let's talk about how do we get those margins back up and make sure that you can continue to serve your community. And that might mean cutting contracts. That might mean turning some patients away, and as painful
Yeah.
as that is, but you need to think about the greater good of the community that you serve, and make those tough decisions.
Yeah. Well, great. Very helpful. And thank you so much again, David. Hopefully folks will be contacting you, and we also have resources at APTA Private Practice for this kind of work. So really
Awesome.
appreciate it again. And we'll post this, and hopefully some folks will see it.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
All right. Have a good one.
I have stopped recording.